Welcome to 10th or Tuesday, episode 5. As usual, my name is Michael Boldin, your happy host here in Los Angeles, California, along with
Michael Maharrey, your happy co-host here in Lexington, KY.
Awesome. Well, we've got some really big news from the nullification movement that I wanted to talk about just over the last few days, Mike. A number of bills that have either been signed or gone into effect. I think most notable was the 2-year effort to get an asset forfeiture reform bill passed here in California that, I mean, I actually expected Jerry Brown, who is horrible, to veto it because he generally vetoes almost every good bill. If it's a really good privacy bill, he vetoes it. Stopping drones, he's vetoed a hemp farming bill. He vetoed a right to try bill, and then he ended up coming back a year later to sign one. But he vetoes a lot of stuff. But we actually got this thing passed. We supported it kind of in a secondary role, but there are great activists like my friend Brian Gonzalez here in California that worked with a really wide coalition of people to support SB 443 that was just signed into law.
Yeah, and I was surprised too to see that that signature go on it, but excited. It's a great bill, and it closes that federal loophole down a bit, and it's important. This kind of reform is so important. This is an issue that I think people look at it and intuitively understand. This is horrible that police can take your stuff and essentially not even charge you with the crime. And so,
yeah, and the big thing that you just mentioned, Mike, the federal loophole, for people who aren't aware of it, just to keep this real brief, we posted another video about this on our YouTube, youtube.com/10th Amendment Center, just this week, talking about the federal loophole. Basically, California had some of the strongest restrictions on asset forfeiture in the country, but it didn't matter because state and local police would just say, oh, okay, well, we can't take this cash or this property under state law, so we're just going to say it's a federal case, and our federal partners will let us keep up to 80% of it. So this bill, SB 443, essentially closed that loophole in a vast majority of situations. It's a great first step. It's not completely done, but they closed it for most people to stop the local police from working with the feds to take money.
Yeah, and that's a key. As states are moving forward, you're seeing a lot more interest in asset forfeiture reform. And as other states look at this in the upcoming legislative session, it's imperative that they make sure that that loophole is closed so that the reforms actually are meaningful.
The bills that actually went into effect that were signed a while back. One was in Vermont that you've done some reporting on, this privacy bill that addresses, I think it's drones and stingrays primarily there. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, drones, stingrays, and also data collection. So it really hits 3 major areas. It's probably the most sweeping state-level surveillance legislation that we've seen passed so far. And it addresses those 3 important areas. And not only does it protect privacy at the state level, but it also puts a big crimp in federal surveillance state plans. It actually keeps information within the state. It keeps it from being shared, requires warrants. And any information that is not collected is information that does not end up in these massive federal databases. So this is a huge win for privacy, both at the state and in addressing federal surveillance at a lesser degree.
Yeah, anytime we report on a state taking action to protect privacy, someone they're not comprehending what's going on. They always say, hey, yeah, who cares? The feds are never going to follow some state law. But this has nothing to do with it. All this is basically saying is, the feds are collecting data that comes from state and local communities, state and local law enforcement, for example, or state agencies, DMV, for example, whatever it may be. And the feds are getting that data from them because it's being voluntarily turned over. So if the state stops turning that information over, it becomes much more difficult for the feds to get it. Maybe they can go hack it, but certainly this is not going to be a free-flowing thing from the states to the federal government that way. And it's a really powerful first step to shutting down some of these programs that rely on the states to effectuate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key is to understanding. It's exactly like you said. The states are collecting all of this data oftentimes with no restrictions and with no restrictions on how it's shared. When you restrict the collection of data, when you restrict the sharing of data, that just means there's less data being collected overall. And if it doesn't exist, then the feds can't get to it. So it's definitely a first step. Obviously, it's not going to shut down the NSA or anything like that, but it's certainly a big part of federal plans. They depend on the states like they do for everything. And when the states are limiting surveillance, it in effect limits federal surveillance as well. So it's a win.
We'll work on the NSA separately, but that's
Right.
definitely another issue. And then the other bill that went into effect just on the 1st was the Right to Try Act in Connecticut, also signed in the last week or so here in California. I got an update from the Goldwater. We've been reporting that it's more than 24 states have passed this. I got an update from our friends at the Goldwater Institute recently that said, I think it was 32 or 33 states that have basically said in certain situations, we don't care if the FDA says that people can't try an experimental treatment when they're terminally ill. We're going to allow them to do it anyway. And I think that's the same kind of approach that's basically happened, with medical marijuana, and now it seems to be getting the ball rolling on right to try. The fact that whether it's 33 or 30, however many states it is right now, that's a huge number in just the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's an interesting side note on that. Talking about how local and state action bubbles up to the federal level. There's a bill pending in Congress now that Rand Paul has announced his support of, that would basically prohibit the federal government from interfering with these state laws. So they're looking at it at the federal level, and so they're starting to say, oh, well, this is going on. We've got 31, 32 states that have done this. So it's now, it's time for us to take some action too. So this is how it works. You start at the local level, you move to the state level, and then it bubbles up, and maybe changes will happen at the federal level. But even if nothing changes, still, I find it difficult to believe that the FDA is going to be able to interfere with way over half of the states, especially on an issue when you're talking about, we're not going to give the poor sick person access to this medication. Nobody agrees with that. It's a political hot potato. So,
speaking of local, I really like a lot of the things that have been happening on a local level. We've been talking about surveillance efforts, legislation and ordinances introduced in 11 cities that we announced back on September 21st. But also, we've been reporting more and more on HUD, Housing and Urban Development. They take these grants, offer this cash to local communities, counties, cities, etc., and then there's a ton of strings attached. And our good friend Bill Evelyn down in Georgia notified us about, I think it's Forsyth County. We published a blog on that just a few hours ago, Mike, about another. I think this is the 5th county or 5th locality that we've been able to report that is rejecting HUD funding, and I guess in essence, really just blocking the strings that the control that the feds want to have over local communities in regards to some private property issues.
Yeah. Forsyth was the 5th city that we know of. I'm almost certain that there's more.
I'm sure.
This is a growing phenomenon. These are very onerous regulations, and as these cities and counties are looking at them, they're saying, we don't want this kind of federal control over our local decision making. And this is the most simple and effective form of nullification there is. Just don't take the money. Don't take the money, then you don't have to worry about the strings. If you don't take the money, you don't have to put in these plans. You don't have to submit to the criteria that are always hooked to these types of funding. So this is a way to get rid of federal power without even really having to pass a law. You just simply say, no, we're not going to take the money. And this could be applied over so many things.
There's a ton of ways that this actually can go into effect.
Education, almost all of the education strings and federal interference is tied to funding. Quit taking the money. So this is a great movement, and I expect to see and hope to see many more cities and counties follow in the tracks of Forsyth and the 4 other municipalities that have said, nope, no HUD funding for us. We're not going to do it.
One of the interesting things is a lot of the federal programs that we're talking about not only require states and localities to actually effectuate through enforcement, like gun control measures, but a lot of them just don't exist if there's someone's not implementing them at all. For example, if you're not going to take funds on HUD, for example, or if you're not going to participate in Common Core, for example, then if you're just not participating, if we're just saying, hey, no, we're going to do something different, we don't want to be part of that, it just can't happen. They may try to come up with new ways to do that, but the faster and more often that we see communities and states just saying we're not going to participate, the more difficult it's going to be for this federal monstrosity to keep growing, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is something that resonates with Americans across party lines. The idea of localism, that local communities should control local issues, schools, roads, transportation, housing, development, zoning, all of those things are local issues. People in the local community should be making these decisions, not suited bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And I think people on the left recognize this just like people on the right do. And this is a growing phenomenon, I think, because people are saying, you know what, let's let our local communities have control over what they're doing instead of having this, this top-down approach. So I expect to see more of this growing in the future because there's so many federal regulations and so many federal requirements that just don't make sense in a lot of communities. And this is why I think that you're seeing it not just, it's interesting to look at these communities. You've got counties in Kansas, you've got a city in New Jersey, and you've got a county in Georgia. So you've got the Midwest,
all doing the same
Northeast.
thing. You'd
Exactly.
never expect those communities necessarily. Well, then again, maybe, but in general, most people wouldn't expect these communities to basically be doing the same thing. But when you get down to it, they may not even know what the other ones are doing, and they're just saying, "Hey, this is not good for us." And we see the same type of action. You reported a while back on the Los Angeles Unified School District rejecting militarization of the LAUSD police federal grant programs that would basically kind of gear up this local police. And it's the same type of thing. If you don't take the money, you don't take the stuff that they're handing out, you don't have to, there's no one participating in it. And I know the lure is very strong. The siren song of federal cash is very, very powerful over these locals. But there are times that we're seeing them saying no, and that's very positive.
Yeah, and I think it's the feds will keep doing it. I think with the HUD thing, they've really overstepped because there's 377 pages of regulations, and I skimmed through some of it. Obviously, I'm not going to read 377 pages of HUD rules.
No one wants to read that stuff. That's why they get away with a lot of stuff because no one wants to read it.
But it was interesting reading the Forsyth, the report from the Forsyth paper, and basically the way this came about is their county attorney looked at it and said, "Look, if we take this money, we're going to have to do this, and this. This is what's in here." And I think the HUD's overstepped. They've created a monster that a lot of communities are just going to say, you know what, we'd like to have the money because all these places have taken the money before, but now it's like, no, we're not going to do it. And so maybe they'll learn the lesson. Hey, we don't need this money. We have more control over what we're doing now. So maybe we'll see this spill over into other areas.
Yeah, and the more that we report on it, I think the more that people are hearing about it. We didn't even hear about Forsyth until we reported on the county in New Jersey, and then thankfully Bill let us know that, hey, his county also did this a little while back as well. I think that kind of cuts it to the edge here for us, Mike, this week. I want to thank everybody for watching. Of course, if you support what we're doing here, you support this type of legislation getting passed, the education that we're doing, the videos that we produce, make sure to join us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And Mike, before we go, is there any big project that you got coming up that we should be aware of?
Not really. I'm just trying to plug along. I've been sick, and I'm just trying to catch up with stuff.
I got to get you a big project.
I tell you what, the big project really right now is working to. We're already starting to dig in and contact legislators about the 2017 legislative session, and we sent out an email here recently on hemp, and the response was overwhelming. There's a lot of interest at the state level in legalizing hemp, and a lot of questions being asked. So I'm real excited about the response that we got from that particular bit of outreach. So we'll be doing a lot more of that here in the next few weeks.
And I like to call it, and I'm sure you do too, nullification season. It's basically the pre-filing session for state legislatures through about April or May every year. That's basically when state legislation is happening at its kind of high time. Maybe next week we'll take a look at that and kind of just explain that whole process for people, because I think a lot of people don't really understand how that plays out. If not, maybe we'll do an article. But either way, stay tuned for next week and every Tuesday, 10th or Tuesday. And we appreciate you supporting our work here at the 10th Amendment Center. Thanks so much for watching.